Two wars, two continents. One common thread. China. In Yemen, U.S. warships dodge missile attacks guided, Washington says, by Chinese satellites. In Ukraine, new intelligence claims Beijing is supplying weapons and gunpowder to Russian forces from the Red Sea to the Eastern Front. Beijing is no longer watching from the sidelines. It's being accused of arming the enemies of the West. American officials told the Financial Times that a Chinese satellite company linked to the country's military is supplying Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen with imagery to target U.S. warships and international vessels in the Red Sea. The Trump administration has repeatedly warned Beijing that Changjiang Satellite Technology Co. Limited, a commercial group with ties to the People's Liberation Army, is providing the Houthis with the intelligence that a senior State Department official said the United States has raised our concerns privately numerous times to the Chinese government on Changjiang Satellite Technology Co. Ltd's role in supporting the Houthis in order to get Beijing to take action. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce confirmed that CGI Steel was directly supporting Iran-backed Houthi terrorist attacks on U.S. interests.
We can confirm the reporting that Changguang Satellite Technology Company Limited is directly supporting Iran-backed Houthi terrorist attacks on U.S. interests. Their actions and Beijing's support of the company, even after our private engagements with them, is yet another example of China's empty claims to support peace. We urge our partners to judge the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese companies on their actions, not their empty words. Restoring freedom of navigation in the Red Sea is a priority to President Trump. Beijing should take this priority seriously when considering any future support of CGSTL. The United States will not tolerate anyone providing support to foreign terrorist organizations such as the Houthis. There is a Chinese company providing satellite imagery to the Houthis. The Houthis. And we are aware of those reports. That has been, I think, reported originally perhaps by the Financial Times. But China consistently attempts, as you know, to frame itself as a global peacemaker. And however, it is clear that Beijing and China-based companies provide key economic and technical support to regimes like Russia, North Korea, and Iran and its proxies. The CCP continues to enable these regimes, whether it be through the provision of dual-use items Russia needs to sustain its war in Ukraine, North Korea's ballistic missile development, or Iran's support of terrorism across the Middle East. Just again, taking back to my topper a bit on Changguang, it's a dynamic where it's clear, as we're learning, their engagement with war and the suffering of people globally. Of course, that remains unacceptable. It is Beijing's support, by the way, of that company, the satellite company, even after we've engaged in discussions with them about this. The fact that they continue to do this is unacceptable. Certainly contradicts their claims of being peace supporters.
Asked about the U.S. claims about the satellite company, the Chinese embassy in Washington said it was not aware of the relevant situation. So CGI still has previously come under U.S. scrutiny and was among groups hit by sanctions in 2023 for allegedly providing high-resolution satellite imagery to Wagner Group, the Russian mercenary army that helped President Vladimir Putin prosecute his full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Chinese company was established in 2014 as a joint venture between the provincial government in Jilin and a branch of the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Changchun, the province's capital. Meanwhile, Houthi-run media said American strikes on a fuel port in Yemen killed at least 38 people on April 17th, one of the deadliest days since the United States began its attacks on the Iran-backed militants. The United States has vowed not to halt the large-scale strikes begun last month in its biggest military operation in the Middle East since President Donald Trump took office in January. Unless the Houthis cease attacks on Red Sea shipping, Al-Masirati TV said 102 people were also wounded in the strikes on the western fuel port of Ras Isa, which the U.S. military said aimed to cut off a source of fuel for the Houthi militant group. Responding to a Reuters query for comment on the Houthis' casualty figure in its own estimate, the U.S. Central Command said it had none beyond the initial announcement of the attacks. The Houthis have continued to benefit economically and militarily from countries and companies that provide material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization. The Iran-backed Houthis use fuel to sustain their military operations as a weapon of control and to benefit economically from embezzling the profits from the import. This fuel should be legitimately supplied to the people of Yemen, despite the foreign terrorist designation that went into effect on the 5th of April. Ships have continued to supply fuel via the port of Ras Isa. Profits from these illegal sales are directly funding and sustaining Houthi terrorist efforts. Today, U.S. forces took action to eliminate this source of fuel for the Iran-backed Houthi terrorists and deprive them of a legal revenue that has funded Houthi efforts to terrorize the entire region for over 10 years. The objective of these strikes was to degrade the economic source of power of the Houthis, who continue to exploit and bring great pain upon their fellow countrymen. This strike was not intended to harm the people of Yemen who rightly want to throw off the yoke of Houthi subjugation and live peacefully. The Houthis, their Iranian masters, and those who knowingly aid and abet their terrorist actions should be put on notice that the world will not accept illicit smuggling of fuel and war material to a terrorist organization. Since November 2023, the Houthis have launched dozens of drone and missile attacks and vessels transiting the waterway, saying they were targeting ships linked to Israel in protest over the war in Gaza. In a parallel development, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said China was supplying weapons and gunpowder to Russia, the first time he has openly accused Beijing of direct military assistance from Moscow. The Ukrainian leader said at a press conference that his government also had intelligence that China was producing weapons on Russian territory and that he would be able to provide more details next week. It should be a system, but what does it mean? This is important information, and it's not very pleasant. We have finally received information that China is supplying weapons to the Russian Federation, and we will be ready to talk about this in detail at AS of today. We have general information from security services, from intelligence about gunpowder and artillery. And I think we will be able to talk about this in great detail next week, especially about the data that we believe Chinese representatives are engaged in the production of some weapons in Russia. Thank you for your question. As for China, unfortunately, I am to be honest, we are, not that we were surprised, but we really didn't want to see the relevant fact that I saw because I did have a conversation with the Chinese leader during this war, and I asked a direct question about weapons, and he gave me his word that he would not sell weapons and send them to Russia. But unfortunately, we see different information now anyway. We already have evidence of this work by China and Russia to strengthen their defense capabilities. And these are bad facts. That's what I think. It's one thing to be on the market in some open market or in an open market. Let's say in markets where weapons are sold. Point one story is when there are Chinese products on these markets and the Russians bought them or another country bought them and then transferred them. Yes, but there are weapons from other countries on these markets. And it's another matter when it's not just some kind of smuggling, etc. When we see this fact, the fact of cooperation in this direction, these two countries, and frankly, it is what it is, we must recognize this, and we are, as I said, we will have the relevant documents someday. Some documents we will be able to hand over by next week. China, which has the world's second largest economy, has had close economic relations with Russia during Moscow's 3-year war in Ukraine, but it has sought to project an image of neutrality and denies any involvement in the war. For Kyiv, direct Chinese supplies of weaponry for Russia would mark a major departure from that position that in response to an inquiry about the Reuters report that said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that China is supplying weapons and gunpowder to Russia. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Lin Jian, said on April 18th that China's position on the Ukraine issue has always been consistent. Lin said China has been actively committed to promoting a ceasefire and facilitating peace talks, emphasizing that China has never provided lethal weapons to any party involved in the conflict and strictly controls the export of dual-use items.